Hello everyone, my name is David Rock. I'm at the University of Maryland here in Baltimore, Maryland, and welcome to Cytometry in R. Today we're doing a recording of one of our pre-course walkthroughs looking at an introduction to Quarto. So Quarto is a way that it's something that we'll be using throughout the course, especially when it comes to both running code as well as documenting what we're doing. And it has a way of specifying different types of file outputs, so I want to make sure we do at least a broad overview of all the different elements that we didn't get to cover already in the previous walkthrough tutorials. So in the previous tutorials, we had introduced briefly Quarto Markdown files, or .qmd files, as we started working our way through the different version control concepts. The main thing we want to be able to do with these files is they can be extensively customized based on both metadata that we provide as well as inclusion or exclusion of code chunks. So we can end up with very wide variety of outputs ranging from Word documents to PDFs to HTML-based websites to Reveal.js slides. So basically, if you can think of it and you can customize it, you can make your Quarto document look very, very different depending on what you want to do. So we're going to be taking a look at how these different elements build together with these Quarto documents. So let's get started. In this case, we had previously created a Git practice local project rip folder that we had then pushed to GitHub. This was just posted in the last workthrough I did earlier this evening. So we're going to go return to that Git practice folder we have been working in, and we're going to do a few basic elements of adding in to make a Quarto document. So the main elements that we need are a YAML header, which dictates the formatting. Basically, do we want this as a PDF? Do we want this as a Word doc, etc.? Then within the actual Quarto document itself, anything that's not within a code chunk becomes the text, which we can use for documentation. And then finally, we have code block chunks, which we can write code that's then executed, as well as include comments within those blocks. So if we're opening our Git practice project folder on our local computer, this is where we had left off. I'm going to go ahead and add in a new Quarto Markdown document by creating the little new file option. And I'm just going to go ahead and name this one quartotest.qmd for the time being. So at this point, I'm just going to add in the very minimal effort as far as the documentation. I'm going to put a little bit of a YAML header here, basically just the title and then the format. Let's keep it to web page for now. So I'm going to keep this as HTML. I have a couple lines of text for the text portions, and I added a single code block, which I can do either by insert code block cell or just remembering the tree tick marks, curly brackets, and R present to specify using R for the coding language specific to this code block chunk. So if we are in a Quarto Markdown document, we'll have this option to preview it. Now, if you're in a .r document, you're not going to see the option to preview. So what this is basically going to do is, based on whatever format we have, it's going to generate the actual rendered, what it actually looks like beyond the markdown code that we currently have here. So in this case, I've specified I want to use this as a HTML web page. So when I hit that little preview button, it's kind of doing what, if anybody's used RStudio in the past, what render basically did for our markdown files. And you'll end up with something that looks kind of like this. So it'll pop up here under the Viewer tab, and you'll just kind of see a preliminary preview of what you're actually going to be seeing in the document itself. So as you can see, I have the title, which was specified by the YAML section, and then I have the text. I have a code block chunk, and then I have some more text, kind of what I saw. And then you can see this actual line of code executed and generated a file. I know it's kind of squished here, but we can zoom in a second. So alternatively, if we want to not do the preview, we can also go down to the little terminal tab, which is next to our little console tab down here. And then we can just do the command Quarto render and then the name of the particular Quarto document that we want to render. So this is the two different ways of getting at it. Kind of everything in Positron, there's two different approaches by which we can get to the same output. So, and we get a similar result to what we were seeing previously using that little preview tab option up here. So when you do this, what happens is you can see we have the .qmd file for Quarto test, but then also in the process, we have generated a Quarto test.html document that's also present, and all the extra metadata that's associated with the file gets placed within the Quarto test files folder at that point. So we can also via our File Explorer, open up this HTML document, and then it will open up and become visible within our web browser. So in my case, I can do this, and I see that, yep, this is kind of like what I was expecting to see as far as an output overall. Now, as I said, Quarto documents are specified their format within the YAML. So if we want to switch the metadata within that YAML to be a different type of document, we can get a different type of output using those exact same building blocks. So let's go ahead and switch this over right now, for example, for PDF, keeping everything else the same, and go ahead and hit preview or render it, depending on what we're trying to do. And sure enough, we get a little PDF output that's made and a little PDF file that's now present within our repository. Now, if we wanted to do a Word document, we have the same options. So we just need to go back up here, change our format to docs, just to make sure that we're specifying it's a Word doc. And then we hit render. But unlike what we had for both the HTML web page and the PDF, the little viewer doesn't show you Word documents very well, but you can see a Word document has been created. So you can then either open Microsoft Word or LibreOffice or whatever you do for your Word documents in general, and then sure enough, you'll be able to see that, yeah, you return a file that's a Word document base. So we've so far only used the YAML as far as specifying what the title of the page is, and then also what format we wanted. But we could do some additional edits and some customizations. And I include the link to the actual Quarto documentation as far as if you really wanted to make it quite intricate and quite detailed, you have tons of options that you can do. But for now, let's just go ahead and include the author, the date, in addition to the already existing title and format. Hitting either preview or rendering, what we end up seeing is that now we have the author block, we have the publish date. When I took a screenshot, this was back in January, and we are slowly building out different elements to this little website. We can also, within the YAML, specify that we want a table of contents, and the actual contents are specified by the presence of a header, which is designated by the little hash symbol. If you want to nest particular contents underneath a particular entry, you could use multiple sets of hashtags, which will together cause a descending hierarchy within your table of contents. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to try this, and we're going to add table of contents equals true to our metadata in the YAML. And you can kind of see we have now a table of contents designating out each of those little hashtag comments within the text block, which are serving as our little header sections. So as you notice, some of these sub headers are not actually appearing. So this is part of the arguments section that we can specify within the metadata. So if you wanted to actually show all the little subheadings, we can do this talk -expand argument and set that to true, which then will show all the little subheadings, not down to a specific level. So this is one of the sections I refer you to the Quarto documentation, just in case if you were trying to customize extensively. This is one of those situations you would need to figure it out on that end. Now, the other concept we introduced briefly when we were installing the use this package to set up the local project folder that we were pushing to GitHub is we need to set a code block chunk to not actually run every time we are generating the document. This is often the case if you're installing packages and you don't want them to be reinstalled, or if you don't want to overwrite something that's important that you have already generated. So the way you specify a code chunk argument within a code block is basically the little hashtag with the pipes symbol, followed by whatever thing you're trying to set as your argument with a colon, and then either true or false being the main types of things we'll do on a day-to-day basis. So if we're trying to go for an eval, basically you can kind of see for this one, I've set the argument with the hashtag in the pipe. I'm basically saying that, yes, I want this chunk evaluated, which is kind of the default. So if we then go over here and look at this, this would be under background. You can see this code appears, this is evaluated, so we are getting this code chunk back as far as an output goes. However, if we go back in and instead of saying eval is equal to true, we set this to eval is false. At this point, this code block is not actually evaluated. It doesn't actually get run. So the get working directory function is never called. At this point, you can see we're still displaying the code block, but that little output that we used to have on the previous screen, basically saying where your working directory are you at currently, is no longer present. There's other arguments that you can do for these code chunks. So echo is one of those situations that basically dictates whether the code within the code block is displayed within your document. So in this case, with echo is true, we get both the code displayed, but then we also get any output that's returned from that code that ends up being displayed. So let's go ahead and edit this portion, at least down on the second argument. So this is under second details. So you can see with echo being set as true within our actual code chunk eval, within a code chunk argument, which is designated by the hashtag in the pipe, we can see that yes, the code is still showing and the output is still showing when echo is set to true. Likewise, if we come back in and set echo equal to false, we can see that the code is no longer being printed, but the little output is still being returned. So this is one of the situations if you're generating a report and you want to show a figure you're generating in R, but you don't want everybody who's reading the report to have to deal with all the code that was used to generate that figure. This is one of those settings you would use. Include is kind of similar, but it changes a little bit as far as what's actually being the behavior that's being executed. So unlike echo, which primarily focuses on whether the code is displayed, but still returns an output, include kind of dictates the behavior of both the code block as well as any outputted text that gets returned. So unlike eval, where nothing is being run, include does run the code, but it just allows you to run it silently in the background, still make all the things that are being useful by that code, but then just not have them appear within the document itself. So in this case, we're working with under initial details. You can see when I've set include is equal to false, the code block at this point is no longer there. And then the output, which would have printed as print hello, is also not present at this point. So at this point, this code ran, but it's just no longer active in our environment. By contrast, we can also set include to true, at which point we'll see under initial details, print is now present, and then we're also now getting the output. So kind of similar to what we saw for eval and echo, we have options that let us kind of customize the appearance of a Quarto Markdown document as we go. One of my favorites is cold fold, actually, because like sometimes I want to include the code, but I also don't want it cluttering everywhere. So we can have code fold, which is basically gives you options of show or fold. And so let's do this down here under the third detail heading. You can see I have this currently set to code fold is equal to show, which will show us the code. And then because there's none of these other arguments present, you'll see it's actually run and we get back the return of goodbye. Now, we can also say code fold is set to true, in which case the code that's happening in the background is still there, but we still get the output being returned. So this way, if you're trying to like have the code for reproducibility and replicability purposes, but you don't want to actually clutter up your report, this is the arguments that you would do in that case. There's other options that you can do that are not so much on the display directly, but are a result of whatever code you're running. So often these are like warnings. So if there's a situation where your code is running and something's not quite right, but not to the point where it's going to error out and not actually give you a return, you'll get a warning in that situation. These can be kind of cluttery, especially if you're just running this for a figure. So in a situation here, for example, I want warnings being returned and I want my message being returned. But when I load my library for the ggcyto package, you can see it's loading in required packages for ggplot2, flowcore, ncdflow, etc., all the way down. So this is messages and warnings that are being executed and they're being returned, and ditto this documentation about the vignette. So this is useful to know if you're working on your computer and you're just kind of like running it in the background. But if you're trying to do this for an actual report, this extra clutter is going to mess up your report. So this is one of the situations you would want to get rid of this. As far as an output, you want to be able to silence it so it's not cluttering up everything on your system. So in this case, we can set the warning and the message to false, at which point you'll see this library code is still being displayed because it's being included and it's not set to echo false. But all those outputs that we get back in the process of running the code are no longer actively contributing to the overall shape of the report. Quarto also uses Markdown for most of its text styling, so many of those Markdown style arguments that we may have started to encounter when we were editing our README file on our GitHub account profile, these can also still be applied. See the Quarto website for the full documentation. There's a lot of them. I cannot cover them all in the context of this course, but some of the main ones, especially for what you want to do on a given day, I went ahead and created a couple extra chunks and a couple extra sections of lines just to be able to demonstrate these as we go. So the main one is within a regular text. This is basically a single asterisk being placed on each side of the line to italicize. So you can see there's little single asterisks around the particular words that we want italicized. Likewise, if you put two asterisks on each side of a word, this becomes bolded. So as you can see, assigned values, two asterisks on each side, becomes appeared as the bold within the actual document itself. And then if you do three asterisks on each side, it's both italicized as well as being bolded. So this is some of those markdown syntax as far as customizing the appearance of your actual written text. Likewise, you can underscore stuff. So in this case, what you do is the word that you want to underscore is surrounded by square brackets, but then you do a little curly braces, dot underline argument adjacent to it, which is what works out to show that this should be underscored. And then also, this is similar with the process of including hyperlinks, or if you want to include images, there's the little square brackets with the little parentheses, and then the hyperlink of the URL that you want, or the location of the image that's present within your within your project folder that you want to include in that particular location. So this is the example of when I'm trying to include the course website. You can see I list course website as what's going to be actually part of the URL link, and then the actual URL link in the background for what we're seeing. And similar, we can do an insertion of the image. This is quite useful if you're taking screenshots of errors and you want to document the process, or there's something that you want to show visually. You can include these images similar way with the exclamation point, square brackets, and then within the parentheses, the actual location of the file that you want to include as far as the image goes. And you can see in this case, this was something error related. It pops in at the very bottom. So, in conclusion, this is a really quick and broad overview of what a Quarto Markdown document is, how you can get different types of outputs from it, and then all the ways you can different customize and edit it. So basically, the world is your oyster when it comes to these editing. Oftentimes, I will use these mainly as making a good report, but also you build websites from them. So the course website is ultimately a bunch of Quarto Markdown documents all working together in concert. So the remaining pre-course walkthroughs that we still have to get through are the one covering how to get help, as well as the Floriada tutorial. I don't have time to work with those today, so I'll circle back to those at some other point in the week. At this point within the pre-course walkthroughs, you have all the main portions that you'll need on a regular day-to-day basis for the rest of the course. So thanks again for your attention. I appreciate you, and I'll see you at some point during one of the weekly live streams.